Hello and welcome to this last afternoon session. We'll have a conversation up here in front of you and whomever that kind of comes along and see our talking. We're doing something different this year around at Data Innovation Summit. Actually having a conversation on a topic that has been surging for the past few years. Becoming more intensely discussed of seeing, okay, how can AI regulation be something that impacts enterprises? And on stage today, I have three wonderful people that will be able to have an interesting conversation on this topic. To frame it a bit, we're in very interesting times in terms of AI. And how it impacts the world and how the world wants AI to impact itself. Today, there was a vote in the two important committees in the European Parliament actually progressing the EU AI going forward towards the European Parliament plenary vote, most probably in June. This is a movement going forward both in the EU but also across the world where policymakers and regulators are picking up on the public sentiment of wanting to steer AI to do good for society as a whole. I think no one knows how this playbook will be written. We're doing that as we speak. But what is clear is that the world outside in form of regulation, standardization around AI will be knocking on the door of enterprises. And it is a question then, how can enterprises take that into account when developing AI, when being able to gear up business processes around it, and to be able to do so without losing momentum in terms of innovation power. So that is some kind of the framing of this, and we'll be able to kind of hopefully kind of grasp some snippets of it throughout this conversation in the next 48 minutes. I'll start with having a brief introduction with me from Denmark. We have Pernille Tranberg, being founder, advisor of both Digital Identity, but from what I would say, what you're most known on is from Data Ethics EU, being a strong voice in the both Danish and European ecosystem. So happy to have you here. We have Alex Moltzau from Norway. Being a strong voice in the Norwegian community, working for NORA, a consortium within research of AI, both connected to enterprise and public sector context. And on my side here, we have Dr. Andreas Theodorou, research fellow from Umeå University, knee-deep into research within responsible AI, explainable AI. So we have a bit of a diverse group here. So to kick it off, let's start with, and we'll start with Pernille and take this way around, with a short introduction of who you are, why you think this field is important, and why, briefly, your thoughts of why we see AI regulation surfacing in the EU and across the world.
Well, I'm a former journalist, and I've been working with privacy and data ethics for the past 12, 15 years. And now with AI, I think it will all repeat itself. I mean, when we got social media, we didn't really regulate that. And that was the first wave. And the second wave now is AI. And we might be able to regulate it and not see all these negative consequences as we've seen from social media. I believe that regulation is important as if it was medicine or even something worse, because as it is to safeguard humans, we have to find a way to live peacefully with artificial intelligence, and we can't do that without regulation. And I'm saying this with big letters because I know a lot of experts working with this are pretty worried. And what we do at Data Ethics is we constantly point to the ethical alternatives. We've been doing that the past 10 years, don't use Google Analytics, use something else. We know all the brands from Europe, Canada, US, which are ethical by design. So that's also what will be our next move. That's to look for ethical AI platforms, and that's a start.
That's the framing of it. Alex?
Yeah, I think what has amazed me today is just the range of like amazing companies, that we're seeing in this space. Enterprises that are, really making these solutions that can solve like important problems in society. Solve like everyday issues for citizens. Like, do we like GPS now? Like, do we like to kind of get around and navigate the world in a different way than we used to? Yeah, I mean, we do enjoy that. But at the same time, kind of like, what values do we have in the Nordic countries, And like, how can we ensure that when you go into a hospital or when you go into a given space, that the rights are respected, So so I think there was like this saying by someone I respect that less hype, more rights. I have a social data science background. I also did sort of like artificial intelligence in public services for technical universities, and now I work with like a range of researchers. So it's like the exciting research, but like the interesting applied side of it is why I'm here today. To understand that better.
Thank you, Andreas.
I think regulations is the expected next step. Since 2010, we have seen over 700 guidelines, strategies, memorandums of understanding, and all sorts of things from intergovernmental national governments. So whenever you have these ethics guidelines, ethical principles, regulations are bound to follow, and they are coming now. It's the next step. It's an expected next step. And especially now that this is not the first AI summer, as we call it. It's not the first time we see hype around AI. But unlike in the past, in the beginning of the 90s, in the beginning of the 80s, 70s, and so on, we do have the computational power. We have been leaking data for the past 2 decades. We can actually start doing amazing things. And we have been doing amazing things with AI in the real world. And politicians have taken notice. But the politicians have also taken notice all the real-world bad effects that AI has already had. Cambridge Analytica, first one to come into mind. Quite a few deaths. We had one government in the Netherlands that fell because of an AI system. I don't know if you know the Dutch scandal around benefits. If not, you should look it up. But AI is here. And of course, regulations are bound to happen.
Thanks a lot, Andreas. And in terms of regulating enterprises, we can take the same round starting with you, Pernille. What different roles do you see that industry that we have here in the room, towards standardization organizations, and politicians? What roles do each of these entities, if we simplify to those 3 groups, what role should they play in this context of regulating AI? Should industry regulate themselves? Should we fall it all on the politicians and all good? Or is it the standards bodies that should do their work?
Oh, I usually, if you look from a global point of view, we have the US, which is more or less a data monopoly, where they actually do self-regulate. We have a data dictatorship in China, where the state is very harsh on regulation. And then in Europe, we have probably something in between, but also more focused on regulation. So I do believe we need regulation, but the main role is actually enforcement, because we haven't been able to enforce the regulation we have. So that's a big role. The new AI Act is really, really good, hopefully, whenever it's totally ready. But enforcement is the key here, and how you interpret what is coming out of it. I do think industry has an important role, and that's going forward with ethics. Those companies who manage to be ethical with data, they will be able to live up to all regulation in the future also. So it is about asking yourself, how do I want my child's data to be treated? That's how I'll treat my customers' data or my suppliers' data. And that is ethical, and that might, unfortunately, slow down the pace a little. We can't be running in the same pace as they do in the US. I'm sorry, but that's another way we can discuss. Also, another point to discuss.
Okay. Thank you, Pernille. Alex, what different roles should these different entities play from your point of view?
Yeah, so it's really funny because like on Monday, I literally have a meeting, that's organized between two parliamentary committees in Norway, because we have this seminar to educate them on like AI and health. And there was like a political party that just recently, I think it was this week, just said we need to ban all AI in healthcare, like all of AI in healthcare, like any commercial application in healthcare or education, and like I'm seeing, there are risks with ChatGPT, and like, of course, when we talk about generative AI, there are some challenges, and there's bias, there's discrimination, there's a lot of issues.
Manipulation.
Manipulation. And manipulation, yeah. I mean, what kind of micro-nudging will we see in voice applications now, when they start integrating that into speakers, at some point? And that's definitely to come, I think. But the role we need to play as well is we need to educate these policymakers and like just heighten the level of understanding, because like we need to be making informed decisions, And I work with researchers, and they don't always talk to policymakers. It's not like the kind of first thing they think about. But you could say a lot of things about the open letter, but AI governance, and how we treat that. I completely agree with you, It's like Andreas is saying a really good point. He's making a good point, Just if you want to make something that's good for society, just start now,
Yeah.
and think about these as maybe possible guidelines for your company. So I mean, that's like a good way to start. Just follow Andreas.
Exactly, and I think what you're on to, or what we've heard so far, is that in essence, industry and enterprises can see this as a unique way of being relevant, of preempting, of not being enforced, but rather being in the forefront. But also in the same way that all parties involved, including the policymakers, needs to have the right level of competence. So we don't go and ban ChatGPT in Italy because someone asked about pineapple on pizza. And I think what we need to be able to kind of be wary is how to get all of these parties along in terms of the policymakers. So Andreas, to spin off on the question, how do you foresee, and specifically on like standards bodies and their relationship to versus policymakers and industry?
I don't think it's a versus situation. I have been working with policymakers, parliamentary groups, standardization initiatives, IEEE, and ISO for the past 10 years almost. It's not an or question. Every actor has its role to play, and it's very important to understand that regulations will enforce certain things, and some of those enforcement might be actually standards. Standards will go beyond what the regulations say. And then on top of that, you have all of these ethical guidelines and principles that each organization needs to understand what exactly are my own values as an organization. And that can be their market differentiation factor. So I think it's like a build-up of these three different levels, rather than I need only regulations, I need only standardization, I need only ethics. You need all three, and you need to find what is the balance between them. I really like there is a saying that law is always the bare minimum, but ethics should be the sky. And somewhere between the ground and the sky, it's the standards. And one comment here, we also need to acknowledge that AI, at the end of the day, is software, it's products, and that doesn't mean that existing regulations, existing standards, for example, for accessible design, for UX, don't apply. They apply as well as any AI-specific standards. And we really need to acknowledge that, because we keep forgetting that AI is software.
So we can already today bring with us a lot of guidance in terms of standards.
Exactly. And even for AI standards, I feel obliged to say that it's not something that is in the far future. We already have quite a few AI standards already out. Just a few months ago, we released the IEEE 7001 standard on transparency. So there is already quite a bit of work done from standardization bodies explicitly for AI standards, but there is also a lot of other work done around software development and software development practices, life cycles, and so on from ISO and IEEE that we should be bringing aboard.
Yeah, sounds good. Spinning off on a thing that you mentioned, Pernille, that we may need to slow down, and I think that that's a fear of a lot of people that have been dedicating their full careers in developing really smart analytics and AI solutions. And suddenly someone says that we may need to slow down. And in terms of, and this is one of these kind of, one of the rhetorics, and let's dig deep into these challenges before we, of course, to pivot this into something positive. But let's first make it a bit dark before we make it lighter. So there may be challenges in terms of the regulation for the enterprises, hindering innovation. We have heard rhetorics around hindering efficiency, effectiveness, competitiveness specifically. I read a report from Small Medium Enterprises Association in Europe. They were talking about a huge, you could say, compliance tax upon innovation. So digging into these challenges, starting with you, Pernille, how would you think enterprises can manage the challenges?
Okay, so I'll take two examples. Two Danish companies, one is Lego, and another one is Novo Nordisk with medicine. Both those companies think long-term. They don't think that everything has to go very, very fast. It has to go in a good way. And they are pretty competitive. And they have been ethical with data. They have been compliant. They are really highly regulated. And they manage it very well. So I actually don't think regulation and ethical thinking is hindering innovation. It is about long-term thinking. If you can think long-term, and that's a little slower than short-term, then you can build a better business. I'm so sure about it. And look at the green technology. How is that going? That's highly regulated and very, very innovative. So I think it's only an argument, especially from big tech companies who want to say it has to go so fast because they are fast. But the rollout of ChatGPT is not responsible. The rollout of ChatGPT in Snapchat is not responsible. It's almost like rolling out some new medicine without having tested it first. We are all kind of lab rats in this race now going on between Microsoft, OpenAI, Google, China is coming in, Baidu. So I don't think it's responsible, and I think they will probably have some really bad examples coming out soon. Yeah.
Okay, so managing the challenges through long-term perspective.
Yeah.
And seeing that building a foundation for the long term builds that being able to see effectiveness on the long term, seeing productivity on the long term, rather than being narrow to see that it's just a hindrance in the short term.
Yes.
Andreas, how does enterprises manage these challenges or risks, would you say, in the best way?
So first, I totally agree that ChatGPT was rolled out in an irresponsible way, but I disagree with the narrative that we need to slow down, or that there is the American fast way and the European, let's regulate first and do everything else later. I think these narratives, and talking about race and the AI race and all of these, are very harmful for all. Because by biting into those narratives, then we end up with all of these more irresponsible decisions. If we want enterprise to work well and work in an ethical way, they need to understand, first of all, their own responsibilities. We need to start thinking within our organizations, most specifically, not only about the technical components, the technical challenges that arise from developing AI systems, but also the wider socio-ethical. And to do that, we need to start thinking how to train engineers, how to train computer scientists. I'm a computer scientist myself. And one of the things that we have been doing actually now, since last year, is that we introduced ethics in all of our AI courses and all sorts of ethical dilemmas, because we need to start thinking about the trade-offs. 10% more accuracy versus 50% more computational power needed. All of these are the actual trade-offs, the actual dilemmas that engineers make every day without understanding that they do that quite often. It's quite often done very implicitly. We need to document this. We need to start thinking about that this is a field that has the same responsibilities as any other profession that has impact to society. We may even want to start considering more about certification of people who work in the computer science. Some countries have already done that, and I do believe that more countries will follow to make this more of a protected profession. And I think that's the way forward, by making people first aware of their responsibilities, and then start thinking about how do we go beyond just the technical thinking, but rather on the wider socio-technical system that is an AI system at the end of the day. And that's maybe one of the good reasons why we need more interdisciplinary research, even not only in academia, but also in the industry. And we may start seeing more interdisciplinary teams. And already, I know some of the more bigger organizations already started doing that. They started bringing people not only from computer science, but also from humanities and sociology into the mix in order to help manage some of these ethical dilemmas that we have been seeing.
Yeah, and I think you're onto something important here, is that we're seeing a demand of being across different competence areas and fields that we had a we are seeing that it's not only being contained to very deeply technical fields that are responsible, but we're seeing business needing to take accountability, that needing the competence of understanding humans and human-centered interaction, the social aspects of it, bringing in sustainability aspects of it, bringing in those multidisciplinary teams around the table to analyze it.
There is actually this very nice contrast in the history of the field. When it started, it was a very interdisciplinary field. It started with philosophers, psychologists, and mathematicians working together. Then when we had this AI winter, in other words, there was lack of funding around AI, then AI became what we call now computer science, and everyone started to do cognitive science or philosophy or whatever else, and not calling what they are doing AI. And then when there is an AI summer again, there is funding in AI, everyone does AI again. But if we want to advance, I do think that we need to go back into this thinking that we all need to work together, and not just the mathematics behind the systems. You need much more than that.
So coming together.
Yeah.
Alex, so coming back to the question, we're talking about a rhetorics of hindering innovation, hindering efficiency. What is the best recommendation for enterprises to manage those challenges? Or, yes, manage the rhetorics around those challenges?
Yeah, I mean, what are the rules of the road, like, because I think this is very much, how do we structure society with AI, because it's like there's no, I'm trying to tell this to politicians, like, it's just like, it's out there now, like, how are you going to deal with this, Yeah. It's like, do we want to ban the internet, like, it's, I think it's a bit counterintuitive, like, so let's have a grown-up discussion about this. And like, I'm just curious to know, like, what the audience thinks about this. Like, because when you're out there and you're driving on the road, and you've probably been in different countries as well, and how you experience that driving experience, that certainly is different, But like, I would prefer, to be at least somewhat safe when I'm driving on that road. And I'm also interested in, like, these large, companies that provide infrastructures for AI models, like Hugging Face, I think they're a really fascinating actor on this market, because you have Margaret Mitchell, and you have, like, that team, that the spillover effect from the Google ethics team into these other areas. and the AI model cards, that's really great because we need ways to describe these models to each other, right?
Yeah.
And for me, I'm just thinking that the state, will want to have some kind of understanding of what models they have, right? I'm both in an operational sense, what can they run on a platform, but also, so I'm not saying it's hindering innovation. I'm just saying we want good driving rules, right? We want good systems, not just systems as in IT systems, but good systems in society.
Perfect. Good systems for society.
Yeah.
I love that point. One topic that we have briefly kind of tangented somewhat is connected to that we're doing this for a long term. We've been on the topic of making sense to educating ourselves around this, to bringing in the complexity of the holistic of the world, that we want to know the rules of the game so we know how to drive in uncharted territory and coming into that. One question that kind of is reoccurring in this field is the question of trust.
Yeah.
Can we build trustful relationships? And how can we go into a future which is uncharted in terms of new technology and new application of technology, where it's pervasive across our society, public and private sector, where customers, users, citizens are meeting these new ways of applying technology, where it's either seen or it's unseen because it's behind the scenes. I'll actually this time around I'll start with Alex.
Yeah,
in the question of trust, where does AI regulation play its place in either enforcing that or how it influences that?
So I feel like I was giving you the wrong picture before because I was saying kind of traffic rules, right? But just think about international waters, Just think about flags of convenience, And I feel like to some extent that's what these large tech companies are doing. They're kind of flying flags of convenience, And this is not a new practice. This has been going on for decades and decades and decades, long before the rollout of the internet. People were kind of flying these flags of convenience, because different countries have different rules, So I feel like we have to kind of get this is an international concern, that's why EU is important. That's why kind of international discussions about this is important, because what kind of actors will we see in these international waters, just to open up the discussion.
Well, talking about trust is, we are very good at trust in the Nordics, and we are also very good at it in Denmark. But now with AI, we are rushing into a lot of stuff. For example, we've had 4 predictive models in Denmark where you could get a prediction if you lost your job, whether you would be long-term unemployed. And that's that can really create distrust if you don't want to know that. And most people don't want to know that. But then the authorities put it on to citizens, and that will create distrust. So if you want to create services to citizens, it has to be with the human in the center. They have to want this. It has to be a benefit for them to do it. Otherwise, it's no use. Then we'll lose trust. And I guess that trust is probably the most important. And it's the same with companies. I'm using older examples because we're going to see them being repeated. But if you have a website with selling medicine, and you use third-party cookies, where you tell everybody about your customers buying medicine, do you think you will create trust with that? Of course you don't create trust with that. So whenever you apply or want to use anything in the next generation with AI, it has to be putting the human at the center, always. Otherwise you lose trust.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the benefits that comes with the many of the regulators that we see both in the EU and across the world. It has a focus on the individual, the impact on the human in its context. And so it brings in something that has started to become a standard practice, which is human-centered design, human-centered focus upon making great products and services. but now rather framing it as a baseline rather than an alternative.
And it's about showing it, not just telling it, because a lot of companies will say, oh, we have ethics by design, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, show it.
Yeah. So what would you say about the relationship and the impact regulation has on trust?
I think it's very important to acknowledge, as Pernille was trying to say, that there are two levels of trust. There is trust on the deployer of the system, but there is also trust on the technical component. And those two parts are quite dependent on each other. And I think when it comes to regulations, it's important to understand that regulations need to target both layers. We need regulations on how to build responsible AI systems, trustworthy AI systems, but we also need regulations around the people who develop and deploy and use those systems. It's very important to understand that, and then also to acknowledge that regulations and all of these systems are very context-specific. What works in the EU, what may even work in Sweden, may not work in the US, may not even work in Denmark. Different countries have different regulatory frameworks. They have different definition of all of these values. Fairness, for example, and discrimination has a different definition in Sweden from Denmark. And these cultural differences are very important to understand, because those cultural differences inform back into what sort of thing are we trying to regulate and what we're actually deploying here, if it actually works or not in that context.
Yeah.
Alex?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's like kind of pay your taxes, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, before that was like something that companies, you know, aspired to do. Like in the earlier statement of like GE in the US, they were like, we want to pay like a lot of taxes. We want to be back to society. This is great, you know? And like companies, you know, like tech companies, pay your taxes, you know? And like Norway, I mean, is big on this, right? Like we love our taxes, right? I mean, it's like we know that goes back in Norway into public services. We have free healthcare. We have free education on university level. Like if you go into Norway, like you know that. So I mean, like that's important in society. So I mean, that's a social contract, right? Like you give, you get, you know.
So the future of AI will be that we have the social contract of how we're expecting to use AI in this interaction between companies and entities or agencies of public sector and citizens.
Yeah, and I think like some private sector companies will gain a lot of responsibilities now, because like let's be honest, like in the public sector, we're lacking AI talent, you know. Like I'm looking across the public sector, you know, and thinking about the services that are being provided to your children, like or you know to you, and I'm thinking, you know, there are a lot of like interesting use cases for artificial intelligence, but like how is that going to be managed? You know, when you're going to meet someone in the public sector, they might not entirely understand that we have some talent in the public sector, and we build up IT teams, we build up cultures in the public sector, and you know, how will you kind of meet that requirement? Because that's the current state, you know. So you have a huge responsibility, you know, on your hands. I mean, like, and we're talking about responsible AI, you know. Join a sandbox. I mean, that's like outlined in the EU AI Act, you know. So they were going to kind of be big on that. So that's like an action point. But like, we can't just play around, you know. We have to do things too. So
we need to do things. And it's a good point.
Yeah.
And talking about then the future. I would want to hear your thoughts on. So let's imagine now that the EU AI Act will land its decision and be determined through trialogue later on this autumn. We'll see that its implementation maybe will land in 2025. What will be the reality we will see with enterprises come, let's say, 2030, 5 years after implementation? What is your imagining that enterprises will do to, how would that look like from an enterprise point of view? How will regulation actually impact the work of enterprises? Anyone can start?
Well, I think that we have some. I just want to. Part of the answer is talking about values and how we behave. In the US, generally, they develop something, innovate, and they put it on the market, and then they hope it's okay. In Europe, I'm generalizing, typically, we will call the Data Protection Agency and say, is it okay to put this on the market? And then we launch it. And that's why we are very slow compared to the US. So I also think European companies have to learn a little more from the US on that matter, and then combine it with responsibility. What do you think to that?
A few years ago, I was in a meeting of the European Economic and Social Committee, and then the commissioner back then made this comment: America innovates, China copies, and Europe regulates.
Yeah.
And I really think that goes back to my previous comment. I think this is, again, part of this very harmful narrative. The reason we are all in this room is because the Commission was funding AI research when it was not cool. A lot of the fundamental research around AI, even Lacoon's research on deep neural networks, which got him the Turing Award, was done in Europe. That was done in France. It's very important to understand that it's not. Yes, maybe we're a bit slower at putting things in the market, and yes, Europeans do a bit more incremental updates, but it doesn't mean that we're not innovating, and it doesn't mean that we're not trying to figure out what's the next thing. And I think that is very important. Otherwise, we go back into the narrative that, yeah, American does all the cool AI, and that's the only thing that matters, and Europe is so much behind, and then we end up again into this very false narrative that there is a race with a magic algorithm at the end. It's not a race, it's not a marathon. It's the same thing as if we're saying we're building computer science, we're building cars and whatever, any other product. Everyone can do their own thing, and it's very important to acknowledge the context, and based on that context, what we want to get out of it. If European companies want to be slower, in quotes, putting things out in the market, a bit more respectful, I think that's not a bad thing. It's up to them. What's the important thing is, when it comes to the AI Act, is how ready are we as organizations, the startups, especially at the medium-scale organizations, in performing the right assessment, in performing the right steps in order to comply with the AI Act when it comes out. And that's actually the most scary bit, is that we are not there yet. And part of the reason we are not there yet is because the AI Act, if you take the act and you replace the keyword AI with dice or random, you get exactly the same regulations. And that's because we're trying to regulate something that we keep defining again and again. And you end up with this huge paragraph at the beginning of the act, this is what AI is, and it just tells you nothing. So maybe if we have been telling, let's do a software act instead of doing an AI act, maybe we would have been much more prepared, because then it would be much more concrete on what actually we're trying to regulate.
Yeah.
So I don't
want some questions.
Questions. Yeah, that's
okay.
But I guess I don't fully agree with you, Andreas, because the EU AI Act specifically says that they have to increase their capacity as well. So it does really say kind of hire people to work on this, and they might not have had that those competencies in the member states, right? So I think that's a very crucial part of the act that a lot of people forget. That it's also kind of a very normative kind of statement by the EU to say we expect that you follow up on this, you know, very clearly. We expect that you follow up on this. So until 2030 as well. I think now there's a process with Senelec, mandated by the EU on the standards. And I think we're going to see a lot of horizontal standards first, trustworthy AI, kind of trying to find common ways to work on that, and a lot of companies as well in that space, such as yours, like Credo, trying to address these things. That's going to be exciting. And I think also going forward, we will see a lot more vertical standards in AI. So I think after the whole horizontal run, I think we will also see kind of more for example, in health. There are already kind of medical device, regulatory work going on, and that's starting to include AI. That's starting to include AI into more very specifically liability. If you do something wrong, that's going to have consequences, within AI too, of course. So I mean, like liability has been changed. So, but the verticals, we're going to see more standards in those. But I mean, like, I would like. I mean, we were discussing this yesterday, Giovanni. Like, I would like more people to kind of connect this AI, ESG or AI to sustainability, and like we're all talking about towards 2030. We're talking about like climate crisis. We're talking about like a lot of economic issues that we're seeing. Socioeconomic disparities increasing. Like there are a lot of challenges that we're facing. So AI towards 2030. What are you gonna do?
Yeah. Actually, we run.
And on that topic, because we're actually running out of time, even having ample time for this discussion. I would want to take your thoughts, and then we'll try to summarize, so as constructively as possible. So starting from here and going then towards Alex and Pernille, what are the 3 recommendations you would send out of the discussion we have had now to send with enterprises to start getting ready for the upcoming future regulation, EU AI Act and others? But what can they do and start with today?
Break down barriers within the organization. You need to people from engineering and development teams need to talk more to the legal departments and compliance offices, and even hire new people with other backgrounds. Create a culture of responsibility within the organization. And the third, start thinking AI is software. And from there, what values apply to your software?
Thank you, Andreas. Alex?
Yeah, so I think, we have an issue with the policymakers. Like, can you talk to policymakers? Like sometimes, just not to try to lobby them on something, not to try to sell them your product, but just to try to help them, make them understand how this works within a given area of society, how it will serve citizens, or like what it can actually do. I would really like to see that a bit more. But I mean, so these are kind of like a bit top 3 asks, for me, and like the second one is that like what motivates you, in your company, to contribute to society. Like also consider that you might have to hire talent for this. Like we're talking about WASP HS, amazing initiative in Sweden. Like you're so lucky because you're going to get so much incredible talent from Sweden that is like very good at these social aspects, of AI. And also, so just like search in those environments and see kind of how you can collaborate with researchers, how you can contribute to research communities, for that exchange, I mean, like I'm very biased. I represent the research consortium, so of course I would say that. But and the third thing is like. Start using compliance companies, like because this is going to be too challenging for you to sort out on your own. Like so think about like how can you also like actually work with like holistic AI, Credo, like these different actors. And 2021 AI, there's also like a Danish actor on this that both has like a platform, but also like specifically thinks about like how they can fulfill standards, like how you can do some checks. So I think like there's also companies in this room probably solving to this. Talk to each other, and try to address this. But then think the next step, and think that maybe like if you're compliant, that's not enough. You have to also think about what is ethical. Go beyond what's expected of you.
Thanks, Alex. Pernille, 3 recommendations.
That's my number 1. That apply data ethics. Put humans at the center. If you apply data ethics, you will be ahead of the law and the lawmakers and the implementation of the law, because it will take many years to implement the AI Act. So that's number 1. Number 2 is try and use subcontractors in Europe, because there's a trend now. There's a trend now called technological sovereignty, and in the EU, a lot of politicians and businesses want Europe to be stronger, and I agree. And like like the cloud situation today, you might as well switch from Google Cloud to a European cloud. That's a trend we're seeing in Denmark now. I don't know if others are seeing that, but you are on the safe side if you can support and buy from European subcontractors. And the third one is teach your staff and your customers data understanding. Because we really need to be more critical consumers, both towards companies and government. Otherwise, we won't change into what I call a data democracy, where we as citizens are actually in control of our own lives.
Yeah.
Thanks
Yeah.
a lot for now. Alex, did you want to?
Yeah, I just think like this is a democratic responsibility, right? I mean, we're talking about AI regulation, right? But we're also talking about like how do we want our democracies to work? You know, I mean, like because that's why we have a democracy. You know, we try to make these decisions together, and you're actually an active person in that decision making. You know, so think about that.
Yeah.
Think about that, like, to make our democracies work, like, we need you. Like, you know, engage yourselves. Like, you know, this is not a passive conversation. This is an active conversation. You know, do you want to engage yourself in your democracy? Please, just do it. Yeah, I mean, like, I'm begging you, engage yourself in democracy. Like, we need more AI people to actually take an active role in this. Like, we need you to get out of your seat, you know, get up, and actually do something, and not think about your like technologies as anything neutral. You know, just think about the consequences and engage in our democracies.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot,
set you on
Alex. You're
fire.
really a strong point.
Do it.
Action. So I think the thanks a lot for your great insights and contributions to a super complex field. And the purpose why we have your perspectives here is that we need different voices in this conversation. I think it can be quite easy that it becomes very technically focused, that we are focusing upon using data for business, which we should. But what we need to realize is that our new perspectives and new demands are knocking on the door. Regulation does not come out of thin air. It is a reaction and out of public sentiment that we see that there's a voice of people that is coming back in terms of regulation. And what we need to do is how to manage that in a relevant way. Well, what we've heard today is we're talking about creating awareness, creating training, collaborative working, setting values to work against, work cross-functionally, see it as a norm, the new rules of the game. All of these things are not strictly technical. So all of these things is something that needs to be engaged across an organization. But then again, as we're talking about a topic that is highly technical, which data, AI, and use of AI is, one critical factor going forward is to see as to how do we make sure that we do not create inefficiencies or hindrance or become a stamp of just compliance. Because if it becomes a stamp of compliance, we'll lose out on the added benefits that comes with being ethical or wanting to do good. And I would say that one of the important things that we need to bring with us in terms of this regulation is that we cannot be passive. I think you were quite strong on that point throughout, is that this demands action, and we can't wait with action until 2025 or in other regions even further ahead. Action is something that comes through bringing it up for discussion, actually bringing up in your teams and within your own leadership groups is that what does this mean for me? What does this mean for my role? What does it mean for the technology we're using? What does it mean for our organization? What does it mean for our products and services? And start actually those conversations, because out of those questions of what does this mean for me, we'll come to a point where we need to answer questions. We'll need to start with solution. We'll need to start a whole new level of innovation. Innovation of not only driving AI for efficiency and productivity, But a more holistic approach where we've been on to it is how do we keep it truly human-centric? How do we keep the human and society in focus? And with that, hopefully, we'll kind of leave out with a sensation that AI regulation may be complex and hard, but hopefully it will lead to something good. And that is 50 minutes of our talk. And if you have questions, just try to catch us afterwards. And we'll continue on this stage tomorrow. Thanks a lot.